Draconic astrology, the word draconic comes from the Latin name for the nodes. The north node is called Caput Draconis, or head of the dragon, and the south node is called Cauda Draconis, or tail of the dragon. And the north node and south node move retrograde. They spent about 1.5 years on each sign. This means that it takes them about 18 years and 7 months to return. And I'm going to be talking about the nodes from a Western point of view, because my background is Western, but it's useful to know that in Vedic astrology, the nodes are treated differently. So from a Western interpretation, we have two approaches to the meaning of the nodes. The traditional approach, which associates the nodes to benefic and malefic influences, and the modern or psychological approach, which associates them to the soul's path or to evolution. So from a traditional point of view, I'm going to cite Guido Bonatti, an astrologer, Italian astrologer from the 13th century, and he says, the head of the dragon is by nature a benefic and by nature masculine. It signifies increase and things that are increased, for instance, kingdoms, dignity, and good fortune. About the south node, he says, the tail of the dragon is malefic by nature, feminine, of the nature of Saturn and Mars. It signifies decrease, poverty, and fall. He makes an exception to this rule, and that is in horary astrology. As you might know, horary astrology is a technique that uses the chart of the moment to answer a specific question. And this technique has many considerations. And one of the considerations that Bonatti cites is when either the south node or the north node are with the moon in a horary chart. About this, he says, the fifth consideration is when the moon is with the dragon's head or with the dragon's tail within 12 degrees of either of them, because that is the place where she is eclipsed. So what this means is that the north node was considered a benefic except when it appears conjunct the moon in a horary chart. Now, about the modern meaning of the nodes, Dane Rudhyar, the French astrologer, was one of the first to introduce this perspective, and he compared the north lunar node to the mouth of an animal and the south lunar node to the organs of evacuation. In his own words, from a more strictly biological and functional point of view, the north lunar node refers to the mouth of an animal and the south lunar node to the organs of evacuation. So according to his view, the north node is something that must be acquired because he relates it to the mouth of an animal, something that must be built in life. And the south node, on the other hand, has to do with experiences that we're already familiar with and that should decrease in our daily life. So he says that the north node should be increased in order to counterbalance the south node. And this is why the nodal axis was called the soul's path, where the south node represents where we are coming from and the north node where we are going. So the difference between Western in Western astrology, the difference between traditional and psychological in terms of the meaning of the nodes is that the traditional astrology takes the node to mean either benefic or malefic influences, and the psychological perspective relates them to evolution and the soul's path. You probably heard about the mean node or true node. If you have a look at this ephemeris page from astro.com, you can see that in May, the true node will retrograde from Cancer to Gemini, but the mean node will remain in Cancer the whole month. And notice that the mean node and the true node are never more than a few degrees from each other. So the difference is in the way they're calculated. The moon, the orbit of the moon makes a wobble, has a vibrating effect. And the true node takes this wobble or vibration into account when it is being calculated. And the mean node, on the other hand, uses an average position of the nodes. So the true node is sometimes stationary and turns direct a few days a month, but the mean node is always retrograde. That's the main difference, but they're never a few degrees from each other. And which one is better? I couldn't say. I used the true node, but Rudyard used the mean node. So this is up to the astrologer to decide. So now let's go back to the zodiacs. The tropical zodiac is fixed to the seasons. It has to do with the movement of the Earth and the Sun, and it starts at 0 degrees of Aries at the vernal point. The Draconic zodiac, on the other hand, starts at the North lunar node. So wherever you find the North lunar node in your chart, that becomes 0 degrees of Aries in terms of your Draconic chart. Okay, so the tropical zodiac is of solar origin and the Draconic zodiac is of lunar origin. One refers to our present, current day life and describes psychological traits, and the other describes unconscious motivations and emotional responses. They always interact because the Draconic zodiac is inscribed within the solar tropical zodiac. So about the origin of the Draconic zodiac, this is a bit shady because for many years it was believed that it had originated in Babylonia, but there's no real evidence to support this. It might have happened, but we really don't know. So the fact is that the first astrologers to write about Draconic astrology were Maurice Frogger, who wrote the nodal horoscope for the Astrological Lodge, Aldo Lavagnini, who wrote about Draconic in In Search magazine. Ronald Davison wrote 2 books, The Lunar Zodiac and Synastry. Then a turning point was when Dennis Elwell introduced the Draconic Zodiac to the Astrological Association conference. Mark Penfield wrote the Reincarnation Chart, and Pamela Crane, who became acquainted with Draconic at the Astrological Association conference, has 2 wonderful books which I recommend, Draconic Astrology and the Draconic Chart. So the Draconic chart shows behaviors that influence my present day. They're not obvious, they lurk behind the scenes, but they use my tropical planets in order to express themselves. So whenever you see a Draconic planet or angle touching a tropical one, that is referring to a prior conditioning, and that Draconic planet is going to express itself through the tropical planet. And we use very, very tight degrees, never more than 3 degrees. And for the time being, we're using conjunctions and oppositions. We still need to do more research. So let me show you an example. We see that we always superimpose the Draconic chart to the tropical one because the Draconic zodiac is inscribed within the tropical zodiac. So we're going to see when I saw Rosa Parks' chart and I superimposed the Draconic chart, which is the outer circle, this blew my mind because I can see that the Draconic moon is exactly conjunct her tropical Mars, meaning that her impulse to fight comes from a prior conditioning probably related to women in her family. And I looked it up and I learned that her grandparents had been active fighters or defenders of racial rights. Also, Draconic Uranus is 2 degrees away from tropical moon, so what was going on in an emotional level had a more Uranus or was involving the whole community for her, because the Draconic planet expresses itself through the natal or tropical planet. We see that her draconic Mercury is conjunct tropical Uranus, and her draconic Sun is exactly conjunct her tropical Mercury. This is impressive. So, according to Pamela Crane, we are meant to be what we see flowing from Aries. Let me give you another example. Pope Francis has the Sun in Sag and draconic Neptune, a planet related to religion and to mysticism and to God, conjunct his Sun. So he's going to express this aspect of his personality that derives from a prior conditioning through the Sun. Notice how tight the orbs are. Okay, so when one superimposes a draconic and a tropical chart, you're going to notice that the placements of the planets remain the same, but the aspects are also the same, but the planets are in different degrees. For instance, in Michelle Obama's chart, we see that the Sun is right on the IC in the tropical chart, and it is also on the IC in the draconic chart. Only in the tropical chart, it is in Capricorn, and in the draconic chart, it is in Libra. The same happens to Mercury. It's in the 3rd in both charts. Venus is in the 5th in both charts, and so on and so forth. So how to calculate a draconic chart is very, very simple. Because the north node becomes the 0 degrees of Aries, what you have to do is subtract the north node from each planet and cusp of your tropical chart. But you can always rely on programs such as astro.com or astro-seek or -seek or cartanatal.es. I know that SolarFire also has the function for calculating draconic charts. So when I started studying Draconic astrology, I asked myself, what is the difference between a draconic Mars, for instance, and a tropical Mars? So I know that Mars has to do with fighting and with assertion and well, with fighting. But is the tropical Mars exactly the same as the draconic Mars? So an Argentinian astrologer, Néstor Echarte, gave me a very, very useful tip. He told me to interpret the draconic houses and planets as if they were conjunct the moon, because a tropical Mars is about defending yourself and action, and the draconic Mars is also about those things, but it's going to be infused with emotions because it's part of a lunar zodiac. Let me show you another example. Okay, so LeBron James has Mars right in the midheaven. This is okay. So this is okay because he's a sports person. But I was a bit confused because I had expected his Mars to be essentially dignified. I had expected a Mars in Aries or in Capricorn or in Scorpio, not a Mars in Pisces where it has very little essential dignity. So when I look at this picture, isn't this the image of someone who's very, very determined? I couldn't find Pisces in this look, in this picture. But when I superimposed the charts, I saw that Mars is still on the MC because this always happens. The planets are in the same placements, but Mars is exalted in Capricorn and conjunct, exactly conjunct, his natal Sun. So his identity is linked to fighting, conquering, being a sports person. And the fact that Mars is exalted also says a lot. And I noticed that both the Sun and Mars are at 9 degrees of Capricorn. And at 8 degrees of Capricorn, we have a star which is called Phasis and has to do with people who are extremely driven, focused, and have an intense personality. But whenever there is a link between Sun and Mars with Phasis star, we have eye problems. And bueno, I know that he underwent eye treatment or eye surgery, I think that in 2007, but this picture is has very much to do with facious star conjunct Mars and Sun affecting his eyes. Let's have a look at another example. Margaret Atwood, the Canadian writer, one of my favorite writers. When I was a bit impressed when I saw this chart because Mercury, the ruler of the ascendant, is in happy-go-lucky Sag, conjunct the benefic insect Venus. And I don't know if you've read Margaret Atwood, but there's nothing happy-go-lucky about her books. Her view is a dystopic. It has to do with censorship. It has to do with power issues. And it is also, it reminds me of George Orwell, the author of Animal Farm and 1984, in her view, because she really transmits no hope whatsoever. So I was confused by this Mercury in Sag, because Sag is about fun and about freedom and about expectations for the future. Last year, we could see a television series based on one of her novels, The Handmaid's Tale, and look at the phrases that are related to these series. The future is a nightmare. Love is forbidden. Let them think they control you. A house barren of hope. Know the lies behind their laws. This is not ordinary. And look at the expressions in these people's faces. There's nothing Sagittarian about these expressions or these phrases. So the plot has nothing to do with Sag. And when I superimposed her tropical and draconic charts, I noticed that the ascendant is in Scorpio and she is very keen on power issues and censorship. Pluto, the ruler of the ascendant, is on the third of writing and communication. We can see that Mars, Draconic Mars, is exactly conjunct Pluto, again, power issues. And her Draconic Mercury and Venus are very near 2 degrees away from Uranus. So this shows how ahead of her time she is, and also her interest in community affairs. So whenever you superimpose the draconic and the tropical charts, the houses are going to overlap. And you always need to consider the draconic house as the internal level that is going to express itself through the tropical house. For instance, if the draconic ascendant overlaps the tropical second, one's deepest motivations are going to be related to money, for instance, or yes, money and resources. Or if your ascendant overlaps the tropical third, you're going to express who you really are in an internal level through writing and communications. So the draconic ascendant, it's very important to pay attention to which tropical house it overlaps with. Let me show you some examples. Jorge Luis Borges was a very famous Argentinian writer, and when we compare his tropical and draconic charts, we see that his draconic ascendant is overlapping the tropical third of writing and communications, and it is exactly conjunct tropical Mars, the ruler of his MC. So his profession was related to his draconic ascendant. There was a link there. What about Angelina Jolie? We can see that her draconic ascendant overlaps the tropical fifth of children of the entertainment industry, and the ascendant is 1 degree away from the North Node. And as you may remember, the North Node has to do with increase and with things that grow. Okay, I always pay attention to the draconic house that overlaps with the tropical 12th and with the tropical house that overlaps with the Draconic 12, because that is an area in your life where you're going to find hardships and struggle that come from prior conditionings. Let me show you an example. Okay, so Lady Diana's 12th Draconic cusp overlaps with the 7th house of marriage, and it is exactly conjunct Mercury, the tropical ruler of her 7th house. Also, we can see that the Draconic 4th overlaps the 12th, and this means that she had to struggle with childhood issues during her whole life. Another example is Stephen Hawking's. We see that his 12th Draconic house overlaps with the 6th tropical house of illness. Okay, now I'm going to talk about synastry, which means stars in the same place. And whenever we compare charts by synastry, we can see the conflicts and the needs and the desires that are brought out when two people connect. When the synastry is between Draconic charts, they refer to that association refers to past life experiences and soul agreements. Ronald Davison in his book Synastry says the Draconic zodiac may show contacts which have been carried over from a previous incarnation. So let me show you the synastry between tropical charts of former Prince Harry, that's the inner circle, and Meghan Markle, and that's the outer circle. So we see that her Pluto is very near his Venus, and her Mars is conjunct his descendant. So on a tropical level, on an outer level, we can say that this is about power, and this is about getting into action. But then we had Mexit, which took us all by surprise, didn't it? And so this surprise, this disobedience, this going away has to do with Uranus, doesn't it? Or this is what I thought. So I compared their charts, and I could see that her Draconic Uranus is conjunct his Draconic Sun.
Hi, Maria. Caitlin again. I'm sorry to interrupt. We are having some issues with the mic being maybe a little close to your mouth, but it might be just because you have an incredibly powerful mic. So if you can maybe
is it better?
It a little.
What if I don't use the mic at all? Is it better?
Well, now it's a little bit echoey. So is there a possibility to kind of just move the mic out, probably like a teeny tiny bit?
Oh. What about now? No.
I would say just a little bit closer would be like probably like half an inch closer would be great. Let's see.
It sounds better though. Yeah.
It sounds better now?
Yes.
Does it? Yes.
Thank you so much for working with us in these technical challenges.
But I mean, is it clear enough to understand?
Yes.
It is? Okay.
Yes, it sounds great. Thank you, Maria.
Okay, so I was talking about Prince Harry's and Meghan Markle's Draconic synastry, and we saw that Meghan's Uranus is conjunct his Draconic Sun, and her Draconic Sun is opposite his Draconic Uranus. So this means that in an internal level, because the Draconic chart refers to an internal level, this association, this relationship was about breaking free, was about disobedience, was about freedom. Okay, so I'm worried that you're not listening. Is the sound okay now?
It's perfect.
The sound is perfect.
Okay. So as I was telling you a bit earlier, whenever I read Margaret Atwood, I'm always reminded of George Orwell, the author of 1984 and of Animal Farm. And I compared their tropical charts, and I saw that Orwell's Mercury is very near Margaret Atwood's ascendant. So I looked this up and I found this interesting tweet that says, we're out of free copies of 1984, but we have The Handmaid's Tale. 1984 was written by Orwell and The Handmaid's Tale was written by Margaret Atwood. So in this tweet, they are associated. And he says, resist. So I compared their draconic charts and I found that his draconic Saturn, which is the ruler of his draconic MC, and her draconic moon, the ruler of her draconic MC, are exactly conjunct, meaning that their professions were linked in some way. Okay? And now I'm going to talk about draconic transits, which I find fascinating because they have karmic significance and are often felt as inevitable. So I use draconic transits on the draconic chart. I also use draconic transits on the tropical chart and the tropical transits on the draconic chart. I use conjunctions and oppositions and keep very, very tight orbs. So, because the draconic planets move at a different pace, because the draconic zodiac is different from the tropical zodiac, how we calculate draconic transits is we subtract the north node from the current position of the planet. Or one could always check the draconic ephemeris. I use Astro-Seek. Let's have a look at Kobe Bryant's chart on the day of his accident. If we have a look at the tropical transits on his tropical chart, we see that Mars was conjunct Neptune and the moon was opposite Saturn. But when we compare the draconic transits on the tropical chart, we see that draconic Saturn and Pluto, a conjunction that has to do with falling, with falling and with destruction, is exactly conjunct the stellium that he has in Libra formed by Venus, Pluto, and Mars. And Mercury, draconic Mercury, which has to do with short trips, is conjunct tropical Uranus. And this was an airborne accident during a short trip. So I found that was impressive. But I was still more impressed when I compared the draconic transits on the draconic chart, because what happened that day, in this slide, I used the mean node, and in the next slide, I used the true node, only to show you how little difference there is, because then the nodes are never more than a few degrees apart. Okay, so when I compared the draconic transits on the draconic chart, I could see that the conjunction of Pluto and Saturn was exactly opposite his draconic Mars, Pluto, and Venus. So this is a testimony of destruction. And Mars, draconic Mars, was opposite draconic Saturn. I was impressed by this. What about Bezos on the day he created Cadabra, which is now Amazon? When we compare the tropical transits on the tropical chart, we see that Neptune and Uranus are very near the Sun, and the Sun is very near the north node that has to do with increase. So this was a pretty good day to found Cadabra. If we look at the draconic transits on the draconic charts, we're going to see that draconic Mars is exactly conjunct draconic Sun. We're going to see that Mercury is very near Saturn, and this started out as a site that sold books. We're going to see that the benefics are conjoined. Venus is in the same degree as Jupiter, meaning increase, meaning riches, meaning success. And draconic Uranus and Neptune are conjunct Pluto and Uranus. So I think that these transits are more specific than the ones on the tropical chart. On the day that China reported the virus, we saw that Draconic Uranus was conjunct tropical Pluto. So this is a virus that is transmitted, or it took us by surprise to begin with. It became very worldwide because of people traveling in airplanes, and this is one of the meanings of Uranus, and it is spreading very, very fast. And Pluto has to do with distraction and death. Also, I was impressed by Draconic Neptune conjunct tropical Sun, because Neptune has to do with water and with mucus, and this is the way it is transmitted. And the virus was originally called Corona, which is one of the meanings of the sun, because the sun is the king, and Corona means crown. On the day the WHO declared the pandemic, we saw that Draconic Uranus was exactly conjunct Saturn. And this virus affects especially old people. And after this declaration, most of the world got into the lockdown. And that is also one of the meanings of Saturn, becoming isolated. Okay, so according to Pamela Crane, we're meant to be what we see flowing from Aries. But in my own personal view, I found that one should also pay attention to the South Draconic Moon, because it dominates our emotional responses and sometimes can be even stronger in its manifestation. So whenever I do consultations, I take into account both the North Draconic Moon, but I pay attention to the South Moon. How did I come to this conclusion? Well, this is my chart, and you see that my tropical moon is in Sag and my draconic moon is in Scorpio. But I noticed that whenever one of my kids had a fight with his girlfriend, or whenever my husband had problems at the office, I would compulsively begin baking banana bread and making chocolate fudge. I needed to feed them in order to feel that they were safe. That was my way of loving them. So I thought, this is not a Scorpio moon. This is more related to a Taurus moon. And I also noticed that my daughter, who has the draconic moon in Gemini, is all about traveling, is all about foreign countries, about foreign languages, about meeting people from other countries. And that is more related to Sag than to Gemini. And I started asking people during consultations, and many people related more with the South Draconic Moon. And other people would say, no, I used to be that way, but now I've grown up, and I relate more to my North Draconic Moon. But I think it's important to use this as an axis, because the nodes are part of a nodal axis. So because the moon expresses our unconscious motivations, I think it's important to take into account the South Draconic Moon as well. And the South Draconic Moon is always opposite the North Draconic Moon. Let me show you some examples. For instance, Princess Diana wanted to be known as the queen in people's hearts. And we see that in her draconic chart, the draconic moon is in Virgo, which we could see during her lifetime because she had to struggle with health issues. But her draconic south moon is in Pisces. And I would say this has to do with wanting to be the queen of people's hearts. Oprah Winfrey is a lady known for her charitable foundations, her non-profit foundations, and in fact, her draconic moon is in Aquarius, which fits very well. But this is also a person who has no problems becoming the center of attention. So when looking at her chart, I would look at her Draconic North Moon in Aquarius, which fits, but I would also take into account the Draconic South Moon in Leo. Okay, so my conclusion is that the South Draconic chart, the one that starts at 0 degrees of Libra instead of 0 degrees of Aries, shows impulses many times out of our control, especially regarding the South Draconic Moon. I invite you to pay attention to this. You're going to notice that people, for instance, with the Draconic Moon in Sag, talk a lot. It happens. I've done a lot of research on this, and I invite you to look at your Draconic Moon in your chart and notice if the opposite is also true. Okay, so I would like to finish with quoting Pamela Crane, who says, because the Draconic chart expresses what we're meant to be, so it expresses our deep principles. What one preaches is reflected in the Draconic chart, but what one does, our current day behavior, is expressed in the tropical chart. So for individual evolution, look to the Draconic zodiac. For planetary function, look to the tropical. Okay, this is all. I hope you liked it. I hope the sound was okay, and I'm ready to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria, for such an informative presentation. I have some questions for you. Okay, the first one asks, let's see, would you say the Draconic zodiac is more personal than the tropical? Because for each of us, it's starting at a different place.
Yes, I would say that, because yes, I would say that definitely. You can relate the tropical zodiac to your family. For instance, you can relate your tropical moon to your mom, or to circumstances during your childhood. But this is not so in the Draconic chart. It's a sort of mystery where this comes from. And I would say it's more personal because it responds to a previous memory, which could be a past life experience, if you believe in past lives, or something that is in your genes, is hereditary.
Great, thank you. And there's a few more questions, and I have a question myself. When you look at, looking at the Draconic chart versus the tropical, how would you say one would best work to, I guess, assimilate both lessons? So if someone's Mars is in Aries in one chart and in Taurus in another, how could they best utilize, like say the Aries is the Draconic and then the Taurus is the other, and
Well, you could always start a food company, for instance. So that tropical Mars could be related to food, for instance, and Draconic Mars in Aries wants you to take action. So you could start an enterprise that sells food, that grows food.
So it sounds like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, so what you're saying, it sounds like the tropical is more the external,
exactly,
the external thing that you end up doing, like more of the worldly, tangible
exactly.
part of it, and then the Draconic is more of the intention and how you,
yes,
how you kind of, okay, great. Okay,
it's an inner drive. It's an inner drive, and it expresses itself through the tropical chart. So my need to take action expressed by the Draconic Mars in Aries is going to do so through the tropical Mars in Taurus, if they are conjunct or opposite in the charts. If there's no link between them, then that's another story.
Okay, great. Thank you. Wonderful answer. Okay, the next question I have for you, it just says, what are the differences between Draconic conjunction and opposition to natal chart?
Okay, so the Draconic conjunctions, in conjunctions, one relates to those planets, and they are personal. And in the opposition, the energy, just as in a tropical chart, the energy of the expression of the planet comes from outside, from the outer world. It comes through others. It functions exactly the same as in a tropical chart. Okay.
Okay, great. Next one I have for you. How are the Draconic transits calculated?
So what you have to do is look at the position of the North Node, and you subtract that from any planet in the chart. For instance, right now the North Node is in Cancer, and tropical Pluto is in Capricorn. So in the Draconic chart, we are going to see that Pluto is in Libra, because between Cancer and Capricorn, there are 180 degrees. And you can always calculate them using AstroSeek. That's what I use to calculate. But doing so is very, very simple, because all you have to do is subtract the actual position of the North Node to the current position of the planet.
Okay, great. Okay, so the next question, what software do you use? You might have answered that with the AstroSeek.
I use AstroSeek. Sometimes I use Astrocom. Many people use SolarFire. People in Spain and in Argentina sometimes use cartanatal.es. But I've found that AstroSeek is wonderful, because whenever I need to calculate something that is not available, I write to the owner of AstroSeek, Peter, and he immediately adds those things in the chart. In fact, for this presentation, he added how to calculate draconic transits and a lot of other functions that were not in his site. So I rely a lot on Peter, on AstroSeek, and I am always thankful to him, because he makes working with Draconic much more easier.
That's great. It's always helpful to have someone who you're working with and a company being so willing to be flexible.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. Next question. Can you tell us how to create a Draconic chart on SolarFire?
Well, you have to go to, I never used that, but I was looking into that last night. And in options, I haven't got the SolarFire open right now, but you just have to check, because there's a button, I don't know how to call it, that has options, and you can choose between sidereal, tropical, or draconic zodiacs. So that's what you have to do. Okay, but if you look at your own chart and you can place where the North Node is, you know that is going to become 0 degrees of Aries in the Draconic chart. So it's very easy to calculate it from there, manually, I mean.
Great, thank you.
One of our, Joseph Crane is here, and he said to do it in SolarFire, you go to the zodiac in the new chart box.
Okay, thanks.
And yeah, and Anthony Lewis as well. Choose Draconic chart in the zodiac option. So there you go. Couple of ways in.
Great, thank you for that, Donna.
Yeah.
The next question we have, in reference to what Crane says about Aries, is that only true for Draconic charts and not natal charts?
Well, you know that I haven't used this. I haven't looked into this, but in her book, The Draconic Chart, she says that it's very important to look at the tropical 0 degrees of Aries and see where it falls in the Draconic chart. but I'm really not. I haven't looked into this. I'm not an expert in this, but you should check it out in her book, because I was surprised to see this. I had never heard about it. So she looks at the point of where 0 degrees of Aries is in the tropical chart, and she sees where that falls in the draconic chart, which house it falls in the draconic house, as a point of evolution, because in this sense, in the modern sense of the nodes, the North Node has to do with evolution, what is being increased in life, what is being achieved, what is the traits that we're struggling to acquire in order to evolve.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful answer. The next question I have is, when you use the Draconic Zodiac, what house system do you prefer? And then I'm going to piggyback that with another question someone asked. And how does it make a difference in your delineation of it?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. Did you say which house system you use? Is that what you said?
Yes, they're asking which house system do you prefer, and how does it make a difference?
Well, I use Placidus for natal tropical charts, so that's what I use whenever I superimpose the draconic and the tropical charts. I guess that one has to. Well, there's not much difference between the domification systems, but I guess one has to look into that and do some research. I've always used Placidus. I only use Reg for horary charts, and I've seen that the superimposing tropical charts and draconic charts, when I use Placidus, works really well. In fact, in this presentation, I've used Placidus for every chart. And as you've seen, for instance, in Lady Diana's chart, that the cusp of the Draconic 12th is exactly conjunct Mercury, ruler of her 7th. I was impressed by that. So I would say that Placidus works very well with this system.
Thank you. Next question. What is the significance of having a planet in the Draconic chart conjunct the North Node in the tropical chart?
Okay, so always when you see a planet conjunct the North Node, it's going to mean growing, evolution, something that increases. For instance, in Angelina Jolie's example, we saw that the Draconic ascendant was conjunct the tropical North Node, and that Draconic ascendant overlapping the 5th could mean growth in terms of children, for instance, having lots of children, and also success in the entertainment industry. So whenever you see the North Node, it means growth, it means increase. Remember that according to the traditional view, the North Node is linked to Jupiter and Venus. It has a benefic influence.
Thank you so much. So we had some confusion about the pandemic chart that you had. Someone's asking, so they were charts for a given day in China? So someone's asked, was it located in China?
Yes, it was located in Wuhan. Yes.
Great.
It was located in Wuhan. Yes, yes.
Great. And then the next question is, how do you calculate the south moon? And by south draconic moon, do you mean the south node of the draconic chart?
No, I don't. So the way to calculate the draconic south moon is it's exactly opposite the draconic north moon. For instance, if your north moon, draconic moon, is at 2 degrees of Aries, your south moon is going to be at 2 degrees of Libra. And the south node is part of the nodal axis. And the draconic moon is the relation that was between the nodes and the actual position of the moon in your tropical chart. See what I mean? Let me show you in this chart. So here in this chart, we have that the moon, the moon is in Aquarius and the north node is in Cancer. So that means that there are a bit more than 180 degrees between the north node and the tropical moon. So the draconic moon is in Libra, and the draconic south moon is going to be in the same degrees but in Aries. Okay, and I won't use the draconic south moon in this chart because this is an event chart. I only use it for personal natal charts.
Great, and I think you just answered the next question, which is, have you ever used, there's two questions. So the first one is, have you ever used the draconic chart for a horary question? And then the next one is, have you ever used a draconic chart for electional or elective astrology?
Well, the answer to both questions is that I don't. I only use draconic charts for natal charts. I only compare them with natal charts. But because draconic is quite new, we still have to do a lot of research. For instance, I found that in the case of twins, I found it very, very useful, but this is something that I'm still researching and it's not ready to go out there yet. But I found that in the cases of twins, many times one of the twins expresses the tropical chart and the other expresses the draconic chart. And I found this it's amazing how often this happens. But I've only used draconic in natal consultations. I've never tried it in horary questions or in electional astrology. But still, we still have to do research. I mean, this is quite new, so I'm positive that in the next years we're going to learn much more of draconic astrology.
Great, thank you. I think from just to follow up with that question, the person is asking because they, you know, if there's some type of soul or inner truth that's being expressed in a certain event or you know, the external, then that might be, they're saying, is that a way to kind of see how that's showing up? But you just answered the question that there's just not enough research yet.
I mean, it makes sense, but I still haven't looked into it, and I don't know of anybody who has. So we'll have to try and see and do some research.
Okay, great. So the next one is, how do you make a chart from Libra at 0 degrees for the south moon?
How do you make a chart from Libra? So the draconic south chart is exactly the opposite as the draconic north chart. So what you can do is you can draw the north draconic chart and know that the south chart is going to be exactly the opposite, or I'm pretty sure that in astro.com you can choose using the Libra, 0 Libra as a starting point. But this is something that is not done. You know how the astrology community is quite conservative, and you're not going to see people using the south chart, the south draconic chart, because it's supposed to be something that we must leave behind. However, my position is that the south draconic moon is so strong in our lives that one should pay attention to it, which doesn't mean that one should dwell in it. I mean, if your south draconic moon is in Taurus, it's a good thing to try and evolve and make very profound changes in terms of your emotions, because your north node your north moon, which is what you're meant to be, is in Scorpio. But in spite of being something that must be decreased and left behind, I've seen how it functions in our everyday current life, and it's impressive.
Absolutely.
So I use it in consultations. I mean, I speak about this because this is a very important part in the person's life, and it sometimes takes up a lot of their time because it's an emotional and conscious response.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The next question is there a difference between inner versus outer planets in the aspects?
Inner versus, well, the aspects remain the same, both in the draconic and the tropical charts. So there's no difference there. Of course, when you refer to the draconic chart, you always have to think that it comes from a lunar, from a zodiac that is related to the moon. So it's going to have it's going to be infused with emotions and past experiences, many associated with past lives that the tropical planets are not going to show.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question I have is, what is the relationship or interaction between the progressed natal moon and the draconic moon? Is there one?
I haven't found one, but I haven't looked, to tell you the truth. I use the progressed moon, but I've never compared it to my draconic planets. What I do pay attention to is the tropical transits when they are touching by conjunction or opposition my draconic planets. I pay a lot of attention to that, and it's impressive how those work. I remember when my sun is in Scorpio, but my draconic sun is in Libra, and I will never forget when Saturn was there. Oh, I mean, the transits were impressive. When Pluto was in Libra, how it affected my personality, my inner sense of self, because that is my draconic sun. It's my inner, internal sense of self. So I invite you to do that exercise. It's really amazing how the tropical transits affect the draconic chart planets.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, just to clarify, so the moon in the draconic chart is called the north moon and the point opposite is called the south moon?
Yes, whenever you see a draconic chart, that is your draconic chart that flows from the north node. So the draconic chart is always going to be the draconic north chart. And in the astrological community, I haven't seen any astrologers use the south draconic chart. But if you want to know what your draconic south chart is, you have to invert. It's exactly opposite from the north chart. But the programs are not going to tell you that this is the north draconic chart, because the north node is the starting point for the draconic chart. Okay? Because the south node is related to past experiences, and as Rudyard said, is something that needs to be decreased. Okay, something that we have to get away from, not exactly get away from, but not dwell there too much, because we need to go to the north node in order to grow and evolve. So we need to counterbalance the automatic responses of the south node and acquire the traits that are expressed by the north node in order to do so.
Thank you. That was a lovely response. The next question I have is, how would you interpret in Draconic Synastry the conjunction of nodes? So if people have a certain amount of...
They were born either on the same day or the same week, or they were born on the same month, or they were born with 18 and a half years of difference. So I would say that they are coming from the same place. Their inner motivations are the same. their principles, their inner principles are the same. Because
Great.
the North Node shows where we're coming, not where we're where we're coming from in terms of what our deep principles are.
Thank you so much. You've been really wonderful with all of these questions, and your answers have really demonstrated practical applications. So thank you. The next question I have is just to confirm something that you have answered, but they want to just confirm.
Okay.
Is the nodal axis always in Libra Aries in the Draconic chart?
Yes, the Draconic chart uses the position of your North Node, of your personal North Node, as a 0 degrees of Aries. That's the starting point. And so every Draconic chart is going to have the nodes at 0 degrees of Aries and 0 degrees of Libra. Let me show you this in a natal chart, in a chart. So in this chart, you can see how the North Node, you're seeing the screen, right?
Yes, we can see the Oprah Winfrey nonprofit organization.
Okay, so you can see how her North Node, tropical North Node, is in Capricorn and her South Node is in Cancer, but in the Draconic chart, the North Node becomes 0 degrees of Aries and the South Node becomes 0 degrees of Libra. Let me show you another example. Princess Diana's chart. So the North Node, tropical North Node, is in Virgo. But again, in the Draconic chart, the North Node becomes 0 degrees of Aries and the South Node becomes 0 degrees of Libra. And we can see this in every chart. Every Draconic chart is going to have the nodes at 0 degrees of Aries and Libra. Okay?
Thank you. Next question. When you do progressions, do you prefer secondary or solar arc for the Draconic chart?
I don't progress the Draconic chart. I only progress the tropical chart. Not because you can't progress a Draconic chart. I still haven't tried it, to tell you the truth. But in the natal chart, I use the secondary progressions. And I also use the directions of the ascendant, of the progressed ascendant.
Thank you for that clarification. So the next question is, do you practice birth time rectifications in the Draconic charts?
No, because as long as you rectify the tropical chart, that is going to rectify the Draconic chart as well. So the starting point is always the tropical chart. I never use the Draconic chart separately from the tropical chart. So if I need to rectify a chart, I'm going to rectify the tropical chart, not the Draconic chart.
Thank you. That makes sense. Next question is, have you seen any instances of out-of-body experiences related to the Draconic chart?
No,
so
I
like
haven't.
Astral body.
I haven't, but I come from a family of scientists and I was a biologist before becoming an astrologer. So I'm not very keen on outer body experiences because of my background. But I would say that you should look at the context between Draconic or tropical Neptune to other planets or cusps. Okay, for instance, I was thinking about that today. I was thinking about that today because many people have contacted me these last days, saying that I was very I don't know how to say exact. My readings have been very accurate, and so I looked at my Draconic chart, and there is a contact between Neptune and my sun. So I thought, okay, so this is the answer for my accuracy. Because, you know, when you read a chart, you're reading symbols, but you can go one way or another. And so you need a lot of intuition to know which symbol to use. So I was thinking about that today. That's funny that you should ask that.
Oh, good. Yeah, I can't even talk.
Synchronicity, right.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, I love them, so.
I know, I saw that. That's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm going to
so,
be talking about Carl Jung at the astrological conference in June in Cambridge.
oh,
Not in Cambridge now, via Zoom.
oh, Jung is really a wonderful topic to dive into. So if
Yeah.
any of you hear that and want to follow Maria, know that she has a strong background in Jung. So the next question is, do you recommend using asteroids or other objects? If so, how would you delineate?
I don't use asteroids in draconic charts, but again, not because I don't think that they work. It's because I still need more time to do research. So this is a new field, and again, I think that we're going to learn a lot about draconic astrology in the near future, but astrologers have to get more involved in the research of this. But I'm sure that asteroids work in the draconic chart. I still haven't tried them. I'm not sure if Pamela Crane names them in her book, The Draconic Chart. I'm not sure. She might have. She might work with asteroids, but I'm not sure. So you should check that. It's the Draconic Chart, and it was published on 2000. I think it was Flare Publications. Flare Publications, yes, published it.
Great. And I mean, I think your scientific bent is definitely appreciated in this field in order to create more validity in the astrological evolution. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. The next question. So for clarity, if your draconic moon is 0 degrees of, let's say, Aries, your south draconic moon is 0 degrees Libra?
Exactly, yes. It's always 180 degrees. They're 180 degrees from each other because the draconic planets are calculated from the nodes, and the nodes are 180 degrees from each other.
Great, lovely.
So the draconic chart is calculated from the north node. So whenever you want to know where your south planets are, which again are not used, it's not a common, they're not commonly used in draconic astrology, but you should look at the south node because the south draconic chart flows from or has its beginning at 0 degrees of Libra instead of 0 degrees of Aries. So they're going to be exactly 180 degrees from each other.
Thank you. Next question. In Synastry, is it better to work with one tropical chart and a draconic chart or both draconic charts?
Okay, again, I'm sorry to say that I haven't tried that, but it's something that I've wondered, and I'm sure that because I've used draconic transits on tropical charts and tropical transits on draconic charts, I'm sure that the draconic synastry must function as well. It must. I don't feel very comfortable in mixing the levels in synastry. I feel more comfortable comparing the outer level, which is given by the tropical charts, and the inner level. But you should try that. I'm sure we'll have interesting results.
Absolutely. More experimentation. So
exactly.
The next question is, can you use sidereal instead of the tropical chart for the background of it? So sorry, can you use sidereal instead of the tropical chart?
Okay, so I'm not sure about that because the north chart, the draconic chart is the result of the ecliptic is the result of the intersection between the orbit of the moon and the ecliptic. I really have to get back to you on that. If you can contact me later, because I have to think about it. But I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. Sorry about that. Contact me, and I can check it out and get back to you on that. These are my contact informations.
Thank you.
I never use sidereal. That's why I don't know, because I use only Western astrology. So I've never used the sidereal meaning of the Vedic meaning of the nodes, and I've never used the sidereal chart. So that's why I don't know, because I've never used it. But I have to think about it, because it's an astronomical question in reality. It has to do, because the nodes are a result of an astronomical phenomenon, which is the intersection of the orbit of the moon and the ecliptic.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that if you don't know, you don't try to answer, and you're very humble and honest. So thank you for that. The next question is, I mean, you answered this, but I think we need a little bit more of a confirmation. Which house supersedes, the natal or draconic house? And from what you've described, it sounds like they're just different. They're not one is not greater than the other, but
no, one expresses an inner impulse or a prior conditioning. So one is related to past experiences, either hereditary experiences or past life experiences, if you believe in them. And the tropical houses have to do with our everyday scenarios where we act out our chart. And the draconic chart expresses itself through the contacts it makes to the tropical chart. So for instance, if your draconic ascendant is linked to the 9th house, you're going to have a very powerful inner drive to explore other worlds, philosophy or astrology related issues, and to travel and to expand your horizons in some way, because that's an inner drive that comes from the draconic ascendant, and it overlaps with the 9th, the tropical 9th. So that is the conduit that you're going to use to express the tropical level of your existence, because each zodiac expresses a different perspective, a different level of reality.
Great, thank you. So just to clarify that, when you say that the ascendant is making a contact with the 9th house, do you mean, because we put the ascendant at 0 degrees Aries, so does that mean like, oh, their Aries is ruling their 9th house?
No,
is that what you mean? Okay.
No. We don't put the ascendant at 0 degrees of Aries. Let me show you. For instance, in Oprah Winfrey's chart, we see that the North Node is in Capricorn, and the ascendant is either at 0 degrees Capricorn or 29 degrees of Sag. But the distance between the ascendant and the North Node means that the draconic ascendant is in Pisces. You see, because I calculated what I did was I subtracted the North Node from the tropical ascendant, and the result of that was the draconic ascendant. So her ascendant is not 0 degrees of Aries. The North Node always becomes 0 degrees of Aries. But her ascendant in this case, as you can see, is in Pisces. Let me show you another example. For instance, in this chart, Princess Diana's chart, we see that the North Node is in Virgo, or maybe 29 degrees of Leo, I'm thinking. And the ascendant is almost 90 or 100 degrees, almost 110 degrees, 20 degrees further away from the from the North Node. So that means that her Draconic ascendant is going to be Cancer.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's see. What is the best reference book for draconian and tropical aspect interpretation?
I would always go back to Pamela Crane. I loved the Draconic chart. I read the Draconic chart recently because when I started doing Draconic, there was no internet and I wasn't in touch with what was going on in the astrological community worldwide. I live in a very isolated country in the end of the world near the Antarctic. So I was not in contact with what was going on with Draconic until recently, worldwide, I mean. And of the books I read, I loved Pamela Crane's The Draconic Chart. I wouldn't even read Draconic Astrology because the Draconic Chart includes everything that is in Draconic Astrology, which is her other book. She has two books. One was published in 1985, which is the Draconic Astrology. And in 2000, we have the Draconic Chart. That is the best book to have, in my opinion.
Thank you. That's a really wonderful recommendation there. And we have, you know, quite a few more questions, but it's about that time. So I want to remind you guys to check out Maria's contact information if you have more questions, and also know that you're going to be receiving a copy of this recording into your inbox. So if you missed anything or have any clarification questions, feel free to check that out and you're able to go through that video again. Maria, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to share this exciting field of Draconic astrology with us. Everyone is very excited and thrilled, and you're getting so much love in the chat of having a thorough and wonderful presentation. I also want to thank you for donating your time. I want to remind everyone that these webinars are free to the community, and we really work with them in order to keep our community strong and everyone learning. So if you have the chance to donate, please feel free to do so. Remember that in the United States residents, any donations are tax deductible because we are a 501c3 charity. And if you make any purchases through Amazon for, say, the Pamela Crane book, please consider choosing Kepler College of Astrological Arts and Sciences for your Amazon Smile charity of choice. When you do, Amazon donates a percentage of your book to purchases to Kepler College, and it's really helpful to keep our community growing and strong. So thank you again, Maria. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us? Exciting news, anything to check out?
Well, I would like to thank you for having me. This was a very nice opportunity to me. I love talking about astrology. And well, yes, I'm hoping to be back next year with my research on Draconic astrology and how it works with twins, but I still need a bit more time on that. And also, I'll be very, very happy to answer any questions that you might have. Just email me or contact me through my Instagram or my web page. I'd be delighted to answer in as much as I can, and I am able to, because as you have seen, I don't have all the answers regarding Draconic. We still have to learn a lot about this topic, but I would be delighted to answer all the questions that I can to the best of my ability. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Maria. I also want to remind everyone, Maria, are you open for personal consultations?
Yes, of course.
Okay,
yes.
So if your questions are really going in depth into your chart and you have a fascination with this Draconic astrology topic, I would suggest checking out Maria's website and booking a personal consultation with her so you can really dive into the inner workings of your soul's chart and how to utilize it in this ever-changing world.
Okay, so I just want to say that while we were having this webinar, Pamela Crane changed her photograph in her Facebook, and her new photograph came up during this webinar. So I was a bit impressed by that. Her picture kept showing up while I was talking about Draconic astrology. That's again synchronicity.
Synchronicity for sure. Thank you so much, Maria. We appreciate you, and we're so happy to have you with Kepler, and we're looking forward to any research you do on this innovative topic.